In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
We've all heard the word and maybe used it, but never nicely. Crackpot. We ascribe this label to people who don't quite fit the mold of normal. People who view the world in radically different ways. You know, conspiracy theorists who see government subterfuge everywhere, especially involving aliens from other worlds. These people, in their own divergent ways, are attempting to impose order on insensible chaos. There must be some deeper reason, an elusive, hidden meaning that unlocks the mystery and makes sense of it all. And at the heart of every crackpot is a bereft emptiness, longing to be filled. And if you are a crackpot, someone who sees things from an unusual angle, none of what I'm saying is meant to demean or condemn you, because you are not alone. Far from it. The world is full of crackpots, hoping to be filled. It's just that most people tend to seek other materials, like wealth, or ideology, or importance, to stuff up that hole inside so that they can feel whole again. Of course, all these methods are futile. You can toss whatever you like into the abyss inside your soul, and it will vanish in an instant. In fact, for the crackpots among us, among whom I include myself, that's right, you can say it out loud about me, it's not going to bother me. We find ourselves in some very exalted company. Although he doesn't use the word crackpot, Lloyd John Ogilvy's inspiring book, Drumbeat of Love, The Unlimited Power of the Spirit, as revealed in the book of Acts, tells us the apostles more than met this qualification as they waited in the upper room during the 10-day interval between Jesus' ascension and Pentecost. Emptiness, they felt it with devastating insufficiency. They had experienced a life of high adventure with Jesus, but now as they waited despairingly for the fulfillment of his promise and power, the words of hope seemed to mock their impotence and inadequacy. It's a terrible thing to have a passion with no power to live it. And that's where the disciples were. Gathered together in a room like we are today, keeping the faith as best as they could, as we do. But the interval had now stretched out for 10 days, 3 times longer than between the crucifixion and the resurrection, which was long enough. And Jesus had given them no timetable, no due date for the Spirit's arrival. Sitting there, the thought must have crept into their minds, well, it could be tomorrow, or it could be next year. And until it happened, they were powerless to do anything. I think anyone with the slightest scintilla of self-knowledge can resonate with that reality. As Ogilvy wrote, we've all known it. A challenge to love when we have little capacity for it. A need to forgive others when we can't even forgive ourselves. A longing for wisdom and knowledge for life's demands when we can't figure out what to do with today. The unsettling needs of people when we have neither faith nor hope to believe that healing can take place. Sometimes life feels like a combination of the Truman Show and Waiting for Godot. The hopeless waiting of the play, accentuated by the mounting suspicion portrayed in the movie that in this shallow, unreal situation we are horribly exposed for all the world to see. and it makes us miserable. Into this bottomless divot of emptiness, God goes whoosh. That's the technical theological term for it. Whoosh. In the apostles' hollow room, a mighty wind blew, and excitement and terror filled their hearts in equal measure. This was the breath of God that moved over the face of the deeps at the beginning of creation, the breath that animated humanity and brought life back to the dry bones in the valley of Ezekiel's vision. This was the same wind that served as the whirlwind that led the people of Exodus from slavery and later answered Job in his desperate confusion. It's the wind that marked the prelude of God's presence for the prophet Elijah when he hid on a mountain fearing for his life. But that crush of life-giving air was just the prelude. Flame came down and separated and descended upon the apostles, and like the burning bush, it did not consume but consecrated them. It was the fire of the pillar that lit the way and guided the Israelites in their wilderness journey, and just as it did for them, this fire of the Spirit opened a new way for the disciples. Moved by these obvious signs of God's presence, they unbarred the door and left that little room and entered into a spacious courtyard outside, where people from far and near had gathered to celebrate the Jewish festival of Pentecost, a festival that honored both the harvest and the law given by God to Moses. It was a dual festival, celebrating both the physical and the spiritual nourishment only God can provide. All these people, hungry for consolation, burning for inspiration, but an obstacle stood in the way, because each and every one of them were descendants of the arrogant people who built the Tower of Babel. Their ancestors assumed they could reach God on their own terms, through their own means. So the people were divided, separated by incompatible languages that prevented real communication. This meant that even in their unity around the festival of Pentecost, they could not fully commune with one another in their joy over God. Yet the disciples had a story to share, one like none other. So their mouths opened one by one, and lungs poured forth air, and their tongues moved like the fire on top of their heads, and words emerged miraculously in every language, a unifying cacophony that empowered everyone present to hear with astonishment the wonders and the wisdom and the sacrifice of Jesus. The story flowed on, praising God for the resurrection, and many hearts caught on fire with a new hope for a new life, where the constant quest to fill the void, to fill our emptiness, might finally end. Yet some disregarded the words as nonsense and sought some other way to fill their emptiness. They accused the disciples of being drunk, even though it was only 9 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it's not like they were Episcopalians. Today, we would probably just dismiss them as crackpots. And in a way, crackpots is what the disciples were, what they needed to be to receive the fulfillment from the Spirit that empowered them to fulfill their mission and meet their life's purpose. At a small, secluded retreat center in south central Kentucky, there's a chapel with a baptismal font right inside the door like none other I've seen. Not made of marble or mahogany or adorned with precious metals or stones. It's a plain pottery bowl with only one distinguishing feature. A jagged crack from the rim down to about an inch above the base. It is literally a crackpot baptismal font, holding only enough water to baptize someone. Everything else poured into it flows out. That's a vision of who you and I are as church. It's a vision of who we are meant to become. A big old bunch of crackpots, viewed by many as ridiculous, but by some as the bearers and sharers of hope and grace. Only when we embrace our true identity as crackpots can we be honest about our emptiness and our need for God to fill that emptiness through the power of the Holy Spirit. We might view these cracks as ugly flaws, as liabilities to be covered over, concealed, ignored. But a pot without a crack just contains things, and the Holy Spirit will not be contained. Instead of feeling ashamed about the cracks in our lives, we need to accept that without them, God would not be able to work through us as witnesses and agents of His promise to flood the world with love. Yes, our cracks make us feel unworthy. And unworthy we are. But God has always worked through crackpots. Take, for instance, Abraham. Don't even get me started on Abraham. Moses murdered a man and felt utterly insufficient to serve as God's messenger to Pharaoh so that the Israelites might be set free. Elijah, a truth-telling prophet to a corrupt royal court, man ran for his life as if God didn't have his back. Peter, who denied Jesus at the crucial moment, along with all the rest of the disciples who abandoned him. Yet they were chosen as messengers to bring good news to a world in dire need of it. Now, we might feel intimidated by the idea that any of us could be anything like one of them, in part because we know that it's risky. We know that answering that call to be a crackpot could turn our world upside down. There's a lot to lose, but there's much more to gain. The Spirit will fill us with power if we make room for the Spirit. And the first step in making room is to stop desperately trying to fill our own emptiness and ask God to do that for us instead. Then the wind and the fire of the Spirit will come and fulfill us. And in manifold ways, both small and great, our cracks, source of such embarrassment, will leak out God's life-giving love to the world.